Our next speaker is the second person to speak for the college in recent months who helped to lead the Brexit charge in Britain. Many of you here were on campus in February of this year when Nigel Farage, former UK Independence Party leader, spoke at the college's Winston Churchill conference. So we're delighted to have with us tonight another one of those freedom-loving rabble-rousers. A writer and journalist, Daniel Hannan, has spent the past 17 years as a member of the European Parliament, where he devoted much of his time to campaigning to abolish his own job. I'm happy to report that as of June 23rd, 2016, he succeeded. He's the author of several books, including the bestseller, Inventing Freedom: How the English-Speaking Peoples Made the Modern World. His latest book is What Next? How to Get the Best from Brexit. And we're delighted he could be with us once again. Please welcome Daniel Hannan.
Well, Tim, thank you very much. Larry, thank you for your kind words. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming, and it's such a pleasure to be able to stand here as a citizen of a soon-to-be independent country among lovers of independence here. Today is, in fact, the anniversary of the first shots being fired at Lexington and Concord in 1775, 19th of April. So independence is very much on my mind, as I know it is on yours. You know, the fact that's so often glossed over when we talk about Hillsdale, that it doesn't take money. Independence in the exact literal sense of financial self-reliance is part of a wider concept, independence as an ideal of self-reliance, something that we try and transmit to people, the idea that ultimately we are answerable for our own actions and that we shouldn't, as a first resort, turn to the state for solutions. The real genius of what Hillsdale achieves is based on the realization that the greatest treasure in any country is its people. And that being a nation, when Larry just said that the nation is not an artificial construct, I'll tell you why it's not an artificial construct. The thing that makes a nation is an understanding that our children are not just a random set of individuals born to a different random set of individuals, but that they are inheritors of a great tradition. Being Americans means that you have been privileged to inherit freedoms from your parents, and that imposes on you the obligation to pass those freedoms intact to the next generation. And in transmitting those values, Hillsdale does the greatest work imaginable. And so in this year of anniversaries, thank you to all of you, whatever you do to support it, whether you do it financially, whether you do it in any way. Thank you, all of you, for making that contribution. I want to talk tonight about what it is that we're transmitting, what it is that is special in Western civilization, and particularly in this extraordinary country. And let's start with today's anniversary of 1775. You might find it an odd thing that I come here as a patriotic British politician and hymn the praises of the militiamen at Lexington and Concord. After all, it's nowadays portrayed as a great national struggle. If you go to the site of the battle, the tour guides will say, well, the British were over here and the Americans were over here. Of course, no one at the time would have recognized those terms at all. It would have been a quite extraordinary way of describing it. Now, we're all taught the story, or Americans used to be taught the story when education was still widespread, about Paul Revere thundering through the little townships of eastern Massachusetts and shouting, the British are coming. I mean, think about that story for about 10 seconds and you will spot a fairly major flaw in it, right? The entire population of Massachusetts at that time had never thought of itself as anything except British. It would have been an extremely odd thing had he actually, I mean, I know they do some strange things in Massachusetts. I know they have some very odd opinions, including, by the way, wanting to ban the private possession of firearms in Lexington, right? Go figure. But But even in Massachusetts, I think it would be considered fairly eccentric to shout, the British are coming in a completely British population. What he actually said was, the regulars are out, or in one version, the redcoats are out. But what is it in our shared tradition? You see, I think that the militiamen who gathered to oppose the regulars, they didn't see themselves as revolutionaries. I think they thought of themselves as conservatives. In their minds, they were defending the freedoms that they assumed they had been born with as Englishmen. In their minds, the innovations were coming from a German king and a foreign court. And that's why I think all English-speaking peoples have a stake in the success and prosperity of this great republic. In order to describe what it is that makes our tradition unique and elevated and noble, and in deference to the presence of Dr. Ahn, who is the world's greatest Churchill scholar, let me take you back to August of 1941, to the day that Franklin Roosevelt made the longest walk of his presidency. In a way that would be unimaginable today, the American media of that time conspired to hide the fact of FDR's polio from the electorate. Every photograph showed him either standing, unaided, or seated. But that day, the 10th of August, he decided that he was literally going to rise to the occasion. He was on the ship HMS Prince of Wales, moored off Newfoundland, and he was going to meet Winston Churchill. He defied the advice of all of his officials who said, don't try and walk across a deck that might pitch and roll. Very slowly, leaning heavily on his cane, supported on one side by his son and on the other by a naval officer, he made his way across the deck as the band struck up the Stars and Stripes Forever. And what followed was the most perfect and vivid demonstration of what it is that makes the tradition of the English-speaking peoples. It happened to be a Sunday morning. And so the crews of the two ships, the USS Augusta, which had brought Roosevelt, and HMS Prince of Wales, were marshaled for a joint religious service. Churchill had chosen every detail, personally and meticulously, down to the hymns that were going to be sung, down to the reading that the chaplain was to give. It came from Joshua 1. As I was with Moses, so will I be with thee. I will not fail thee nor forsake thee. Be strong and of good courage. And afterwards, exultantly, Churchill burst out the same language, the same hymns, the same ideals. And when he said the same ideals, he wasn't making some bland generalization about being the good guys. Think of the world as it stood in 1941. The entire Eurasian landmass, from Lisbon to Vladivostok, was under one form or another of authoritarianism. Freedom was beaten back to its core English-speaking heartland. Do you know, it's the easiest thing in the world to take things for granted, to become blasé about what we've grown up with. But almost everything that we now take for granted as part of being a modern, liberal, open, comfortable society was something that owed its rise to the victory of the English-speaking peoples. We take for granted regular elections and uncensored newspapers and equality between men and women and jury trials and habeas corpus, and we call them universal values. But just imagine that the Cold War had ended differently. Or just imagine that the Second World War had ended differently. There'd have been nothing universal about them then. The reality is that all of those precepts were overwhelmingly developed in the language in which you are listening to my words. And that is the peculiar genius of the English-speaking peoples. And that is where Hillsdale and all of us have an obligation to keep alive what makes us who we are. And it was as a people, conscious of who we are, conscious of what our fathers had done, that my countrymen in June defied all the official advice, disregarded all the hectoring and the bullying and the threats, and chose to be, once again, a self-governing nation, hiring and firing its own lawmakers, living under its own statutes. You know, the phrase "against all the odds" is a very overused one in politics. But on this occasion, against all the odds, well, that is literally apposite. Translated into probabilities, the bookies' odds on the day of the vote were 18% for leave, 82% for remain. Journalists were casting around for cliches. It was David versus Goliath. You know, now, David had it easy compared to us, right? I mean, Goliath, we know, was a big guy, right? 6 cubits and a span, and he had a big, heavy helmet, and his brass coat weighed 5,000 shekels, and the haft of his spear was as a weaver's loom, and its head was 600 shekels of iron. But he was just one guy. You want something more equivalent to what happened in our Brexit referendum. Imagine that Goliath had said, "Hey, I don't like the look of that little shepherd boy." That he'd sent back to Gath for reinforcements. That he'd got a proper troop of Philistine spearmen behind him. And that they'd all rushed at little David en masse. And then, boom, 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 one after another, they'd gone down slingshot to forehead. That would have been a little bit closer to what it was that we were taking on. Every party leader, every broadcaster, every big corporation, every think tank and internationally funded bureaucracy, the whole of the establishment in arms. One of my constituents put it beautifully. She said, you know, this is the working classes against the smirking classes. Now, the British class system is so convoluted that very few of us understand it ourselves, let alone being able to explain it to friends in other countries. But I think most Americans will have a sense of what it was she was getting at. And on the day that people threw off the system as a horse shakes off flies. And you know what? They were right. They were right to disregard all the official advice. All of the things that we were told during the campaign would follow as consequences of a Leave vote have conspicuously failed to materialize. The IMF today, for the third time, upgraded its growth forecast, having told us during the campaign that it would be calamitous if we voted to leave. We were told that there would be a technical recession in 2016. In fact, we grew faster in the 6 months after the vote than we had in the 6 months before, and finished 2016 as the most successful major economy in the world. We were told that if we voted leave, that unemployment would rise by 250,000 over the next 2 years. Well, we're 9 months into that, and it's so far fallen by 60,000. We were told that if we voted leave, the stock exchange would collapse. We weren't told that that would be the Italian stock exchange, and the British stocks would be the best performing in Europe. And we disregarded the effect. You know, one of the things that happened during the campaign was David Cameron, of course, understandably, called in help from every foreign leader who owed him a favor, including Barack Obama. And Barack Obama came and he said, in his best sort of schoolmastery manner, because he's not a man who likes to be crossed in any way, he said, you need to understand that if you vote to leave, you are going to be back of the line for any trade deal with the United States. Only he considerately translated it into the British vernacular and said, back of the queue. Those of you like Penny who have lived in the UK, and indeed like Dr. Ahn, who studied Winston Churchill there, will know that, you know, queues are a big deal. So this was an important cultural reference for him. And, you know, and I have to say, it did make a difference. It made a difference because there were 4 opinion polls published the following week, and all of them showed a massive swing to vote leave, right? And I may be the only speaker ever to have had the chance to say this at a Hillsdale event, but thank you, Barack Obama, because you may have been the guy who made the difference. But, you know, and I'll tell you why it was that people reacted as they did. I'll be honest, it's not because there's any animus against Barack Obama. It was that we knew in our bones that he was urging on us a policy that no American would countenance. Suppose that I were to come here as a British politician and say, okay guys, here's the plan for what you should do next. We want you to form a supranational Pan-American Union. Okay? Let's have a Pan-American parliament in, I don't know, Caracas, that will have the power to override your national laws. And let's have a Supreme Court in Managua that can strike down acts of your Congress. Why don't we throw in, while we're at it, a central bank in Lima that will administer your new currency, the Pan-American peso. Right? I'm guessing that the reaction of most of you would be buzz off. I suspect some of you would use a stronger word than buzz. And you'd be right to, because independence, the ability to hire and fire your rulers, the sublime idea that laws should not be passed, nor taxes raised except by those who are answerable to the rest of us, is the most precious thing a nation can have. And so when people heard Barack Obama urging us to merge our national identity in with other countries, we politely but firmly declined his advice. And we were right. This is a great thing. And one of the things that Dr. Ahn talks about, and he mentioned again tonight, the mismatch between the bureaucracy and everybody else. If you really want to understand what happened in June in our Brexit referendum, I can do no better than offer Edmund Burke's diagnosis in 1791. He said, because half a dozen grasshoppers, concealed beneath the fern, make the field ring with their importunate chink, whilst thousands of great cattle take their repose in the shade of the British oak and chew the cud in silence. Pray do not imagine that those who make all the noise are the only inhabitants of the field. Well, we discovered on the 24th of June that not only were the oxen more numerous than the crickets, but they were right. Of course, the crickets are still shrieking in outrage, and never more loudly than today, because they thought they could bring the whole process back into Parliament. And for the last 9 months, they've been saying, oh, Theresa May has no mandate for Brexit. She doesn't even have a mandate to be Prime Minister. Nobody elected her. So the moment she says, okay, let's have a mandate, oh, no, but this is terrible. The Labour guy, the Labour spokesman on Brexit said, this is a coup, right? This is an unusual way to describe Parliament dissolving itself and asking for a new mandate from the people. It's a coup, meaning, of course, what he means by that is it's been taken out of the hands of the grasshoppers. The people have made their rude entry back into the field. And that's, I'll tell you what though, the one thing I've learned is that people are wiser than their leaders. And the reason I'm optimistic, both about my country and about yours, is that the people are now back in charge. Now here's the thing. Actually, I want to say one other thing about the referendum, which is this. Is there anyone here from Indiana? Anybody here tonight from Indiana? I know you've come from all over. One, so that's probably about in proportion to the population of Indiana, isn't it? So, well, that one is going to have to be my proxy here when I say that for the rest of my life, Hoosiers in general, and Mike Pence in particular, are always going to have a special place in my heart. And I'll tell you why. A week after that Barack Obama back of the queue thing, the state of Indiana took out advertisements in UK newspapers, which said, cousins, however you vote, you're always at the front of the business queue in Indiana. And it then went on to list, British Airways and British Aerospace and Tate & Lyle and all of the UK companies in Indiana. Now, at that time, nobody thought we were going to win. And it's one of those moments where you really learn who your friends are. And that's why I'm so pleased about the change in tone. Just today, we had the Speaker of Congress, Paul Ryan, in London, calling for an immediate move to a bilateral free trade agreement. Indiana is not alone in being able to list all of those UK companies. Virtually every state in the Union could come up with a similar roll call. And so could every region of the UK if it were the other way around. Britain is the biggest investor here. The US is the biggest investor in Britain. 1 million Brits every day turn up to work for American-owned companies. 1 million Americans every day clock in to work for British-owned companies. The only thing that so far has not followed has been the trade, because the trade has been controlled by Brussels, not London. And that can now change. We can form the most obvious common market, based as it is on a common language and law, common habit and history, common customs and kinship. But here's the thing. We first need to win the argument for free trade being desirable. And at the moment, I'm not sure we are winning that. Great paradox of our age. The human race has never been materially better off than now. You can measure it in any way you like. Literacy, longevity, calorie intake, female education, height, any way you like, right? There's never been a better time to be alive. As recently as 1990, 38% of human beings lived in extreme poverty, defined by the UN as an income of $1 a day or less. Now it's 8%. We can realistically look forward to the complete elimination of that kind of squalor. If I think of the changes just while I've been alive, I was born in 1971. In 1971, it took the average American more than a month on average wages to be able to afford a color TV set. Now it's less than 2 days. In 1971, a stationary car emitted more pollution than a car moving at full speed today. In 1971, fewer than half of girls worldwide completed primary education. Now it's more than 90%. And yet, in almost every advanced country, in fact, all over the world, well-meaning, idealistic people are marching against trade deals, picketing G20 meetings, occupying stock exchanges, thinking that in doing so, they are standing up for the poor against the big corporates. Whereas in reality, they're doing exactly the opposite. Nobody gains more from distortions and tariffs and quotas than the big multinationals. Nobody gains more from their lifting than the poorest people on earth. The miracle that we've seen in my lifetime has been driven by previously closed economies entering the global market system. Which brings me back to the mission of Hillsdale. See, what I'm saying is a counterintuitive and difficult idea. But just think of the extent of the miracle that has been achieved in this country and in other countries based on property and free exchange. Potted history of the human race. 10,000 years ago, we discovered farming, right? Amazing discovery that you put seeds in the ground and crops come out. It took about 5 minutes for somebody to make the next discovery, which is it's easier to steal somebody else's crop than to spend all year tending to my own. Right? And about 5 minutes after that, the really lethal breakthrough, which is the best ratio of effort to outcome is not to go around marauding myself, but to regularize that predation through tithes and tolls and taxes. And thus was agrarian civilization born in tyranny. And for most of the last 10,000 years, that was the story of the human race. Oppression, serfdom, caste, slavery, squalor. What we call history was truly the history of the 1% of the 1%, while everybody else bent their backs, dawn to dusk, in the fields. And then the miracle came, and it happened in the English language. The extraordinary idea that you could elevate the rules above the ruler. The idea that we were autonomous individuals, free to contract deals one with another on an issue-by-issue basis, without having all of our relations mediated by caste and birth and tradition. That shift from status to contract. And on the back of it came ultimately the little miracle in the old courthouse in Philadelphia. As I say, in the minds of the signatories, they were drawing on an old tradition. They didn't think they were inventing anything. They looked back through the English Revolution, the English Civil War, back through the Great Charter, back to the folk right of Anglo-Saxon common law. But the one thing that they knew that civilization was based on was the rule of law and private property. That's the peculiar genius of the English-speaking peoples. but it's based on the idea of ownership and free exchange. It's based on the idea that what we do with our goods and possessions is up to us and not up to the government. And that idea is under fire intellectually here and in my country and everywhere else. I was amazed, I spent part of the last presidential election here. I was amazed watching both candidates attacking each other for shopping abroad. So it's a kind of a bad thing to buy stuff more cheaply and concentrate on what you do well. Free trade is under fire, and it's always on apparently superficially plausible grounds. Well, we're in favor of free trade in principle, but we need to nurture some infant industry, or we need to have self-reliance in this strategic area. I'll tell you why all of those arguments are specious. Think of it like this. Why, in wartime, do we blockade enemy belligerents? What is it that we're trying to achieve when we cut off a country that we're fighting against? We're trying to make them poorer, we're trying to disrupt their supply line. Can we all agree that we're not doing it to nurture their infant industries? Right? We're not trying to do them a favor by making them more self-sufficient in food or energy. We're not trying to build them up so that they can be more competitive in world markets. Every argument for tariffs and distortions ends up being an argument for inflicting on yourself in peacetime what an enemy power does to you in wartime. The difficulty we have, I'll be frank about this, I've been an elected representative now for 18 years, what I'm saying is counterintuitive. It is literally counterintuitive. We have hunter-gatherer brains. Right? We have an evolved instinct that tells us that we want to provide against famine, we want to hoard food, we want to be self-reliant. The idea of being dependent on other people may be the basis of civilization, but it's running up against 1 million years of evolution. Ultimately, how do you win this argument? You win it by doing it and showing that it works. And if you look at the countries in the world that have opened their markets, the Singapores, the New Zealands, the Hong Kongs, nobody ever wants to go back. When Singapore became independent in 1960, income per head there was slightly less than half of what it was in the UK. Now it's nearly twice. Now, how did that happen? In a country without any natural resources at all. A country that has to import even its drinking water. It's been turned from a tropical mosquito-infested swamp into one of the most extraordinary city-states in the world because it removed all barriers to trade. As simple as that. Everything else followed. Now, we have an opportunity now, your country and mine, to achieve something extraordinary. To have a trading relationship based around mutual recognition of products and free competition. Getting away from all the cartels and the corporatism that we saw creeping in to the Obama administration's trade talks. Getting rid of all the attempts to impose common standards and raise barriers against smaller rivals. Simple deal that says, you know what, if this is legal in your country, it's legal in ours, and vice versa. If somebody can practice on Wall Street, he can practice in the City of London. If someone can sell insurance in Britain, he can sell it here. If a drug is approved by the FDA, that's good enough for us. If we did that, we would boost our economies by billions, and the only losers would be the cartel politicians, the lobbyists, and the big corporates who use regulation as a way of disadvantaging their rivals. If we can make that work, I hope it will underpin a great new age of British-American global leadership. I began by mentioning the coincidence of the day. Actually, a lot of, as Tim said, a lot of anniversaries around. It's not just the anniversary of Lexington and Concord. Today is exactly the 19th of April, 1817, was when David Ricardo published the theory of comparative advantage on which all free trade rests. If your country and mine can make a reality of it, we will have done the human race some service. And it wouldn't be anything very radical. It's in your tradition and in ours. Our mission was to elevate and ennoble the species by moving the obstacles, by shifting the rocks and letting the grass grow. And it wasn't long after Lexington and Concord that our countries became allies and friends. The first US ambassador to the Court of St. James following independence was John Adams, the future president. And when he was presented to the king, it could have been a pretty awkward meeting, as you can imagine. But he made a very handsome and affecting speech. And he ended by saying, "Your Majesty, I should account myself the happiest of men if I could restore the old good nature and old good humor between peoples who, though separated by an ocean and living under different governments, have yet the same language, kindred religion, and shared blood." Well, times have moved on a little bit. We no longer have exactly shared blood. Both of our countries have been altered by demographic change. But I think we have something much more important. We have the kindred of the mind. We have a shared outlook. And that gives us a stake in your success. And that's why, my friends, I am so optimistic now when I look at the likely future of the United States. I see Congress buzzing with ideas of things that haven't been done for decades, but that can now be achieved. Return of power from Washington to the 50 states. Shift in power from the unelected federal bureaucrat to the elected local representative. A reduction in tax rates, particularly corporate tax rates, to a level that the rest of the industrialized world would regard as kind of normal. I can see, eventually, I think also a repeal of Obamacare, which has been a cage around your economy. Even, how about this, judges who will rule on the basis of what the law says, rather than on the basis of what they think it ought to say. There is every reason to be optimistic about the future of this country. And I want you to know this. We will be alongside you. Although we may not all still have kindred blood, we do have kindred beliefs. We sing the same songs. We kneel at the same altars. We cleave to the creed of freedom. Hold fast to that freedom. Pass it on securely to your children.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We now have time for some questions. Daniel Hannan has graciously agreed to take some questions from the audience. We have some students with microphones. We just ask that you wait for the microphone to come to you to ask your question, and the students will find you. So with that, the floor is open.
Yes, wasn't the, in regard to the European Union, wasn't the Constitution itself an exercise in independent states giving up their freedoms for a larger government for the common good?
Do you know, it's a really interesting exercise to compare your Constitution to the Constitution of the European Union, which is now called the Lisbon Treaty. Your Constitution is 7,200 words, including all the amendments. The EU's is more than 175,000 words. Yours is mainly about the dispersal of power, drawing the border between state and federal authority and so on. The EU's is mainly about the concentration of power. It keeps enumerating more and more powers on everything from the status of the disabled to space exploration. I mean, it's boundless. You know, there was a debate at the time, why is there no mention of Europe's Judeo-Christian heritage? Well, you know, I think it's all there in the Babel story. When you have authors with this level of presumption, there's no room for the Almighty in a document like that. I mean, I suspect he'll be able to look after himself, but it's the document that I was worried about. Your Declaration of Independence promises life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. The EU's equivalent, which is called the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms, guarantees our right to strike action, free healthcare, and affordable housing. You see the difference in approach here, right? The categorical difference in attitude to state power. And I think the real clincher is this. Your Constitution eventually came into effect following ratification by the 13 member states. well, I think by 11 of them. I think it was in Rhode Island and North Carolina came into line a bit later. The EU constitution was rejected in referendum in France, in the Netherlands, and in Ireland, and was then imposed anyway. Because they've never been concerned about democracy. They regard their ideology as being too important to be left to the ballot box. They think it trumps the rule of law, freedom, and the will of the people. And ultimately, that was the system that Britain voted to leave, right? See, I really want to stress this. We're not turning our backs on our allies in Europe. During the campaign, a decision was made to deploy British forces to defend Poland and Estonia. That deployment has now been made. No one has criticized it. It's a completely uncontroversial thing that we're standing by our friends in Europe. We have a continuing interest, an immediate stake in the success of our European neighbors, because prosperous neighbors make good customers, and because these are old friends of ours. So we were not voting against Europe. What we were voting against was a remote, self-serving bureaucracy that admits no impediment to its ambitions. That is utterly at odds with your tradition, utterly at odds with ours. We will be a free, independent people, interested and engaged in the affairs of every continent, including Europe, but living once again under our own laws.
I'm going to make a couple of statements, and I'd like you to comment. Two things from personal experience. I'm a nurse. We have had a lead problem in our country in the past. The U.S. stopped making lead products in our country. Guess what? Let me clarify this. I'm not criticizing China people. I'm criticizing stuff that comes from China. Please, I know many Chinese have died for their freedom. I remember Tiananmen Square. I remember when the Chinese, do you remember, if anybody remembers this in the recent history, about 2 Chinese people that tried to come to this country by mailing themselves here and they suffocated? So please do not think I'm going after China personally. We had lead paint in our country. We cannot manufacture lead-containing products. With some of the way the regulations are, we let lead products come into our country again that come from China. Okay. Second comment. I have been a boat owner. My boat was my home for a period of 5 years. Did not know there was a difference between American steel and steel made from China. I bought something not knowing that this Chinese piece of steel was substandard. It could have taken my home out if I had been not on the dock. Did not know it was substandard. Never had a problem with American steel.
Okay, I think I get where you're coming from, and of course this issue will arise even in the US-UK talks, right? There are people in my constituency who say, oh, but I don't want the hormone-treated beef that they have in the US, or the current obsession is the chlorinated chicken. Apparently you treat chicken with chlorine or something. I had this actually at a meeting not long ago. A lady asked a very similar question to yours, but from our point of view. And maybe if you think about this coming from another country but directed against American products, you'll see what's wrong with it. She said, I don't want to be eating this chlorinated chicken. And I thought, well, okay, madam, I could explain that no one's going to force you to buy anything, but if I'm explaining that, I'm losing the argument. So instead, this was an affluent part of my constituency, part of Surrey. So I just said, okay, everybody put up your hand if you've been to the US. It was 100% of people in the room. I said, okay, keep your hand up if you had any chicken while you were there. Of course, it's still almost 100%, right? People are very easily scared when something new is proposed. But remember that all of the common law defenses that a consumer has will still be in force here. Right? If somebody is guilty of mis-selling, or of tort, or of producing something that is deleterious to public health, that is covered under your existing legal system. What we're talking about is lifting restrictions that are imposed by a producer here in order to keep out a competitor from overseas. Now, this has happened with Chinese steel. It's happened in the US with Chinese steel. In 2009, Barack Obama, in response to pressure from the United Steelworkers, imposed tariffs on wheels made of steel from China. Tariffs that went up in stages to 35%. Okay? The cost of this policy was $1.1 billion. Did it save any jobs? Well, yes, it saved 1,200 jobs among US steelworkers, jobs that were paid an average of $40,000. Okay, so for an outlay of $1.1 billion, there was a saving equivalent to $48 million. But it was much worse than that. Because people were having to spend much more money on buying these wheels from Indonesia or wherever, they had less money to spend on everything else. And as a result of not being able to spend money on other products, 3,700 jobs were lost across the rest of the economy, some of them almost certainly held by members of the United Steelworkers. Why does that happen? It's what the French economist Bastiat calls the visible and the invisible, or the seen and the unseen. In fact, I'll summarize the problem as a politician. The problem with free trade can be summarized in 4 words: dispersed gains, concentrated losses. You buy the cheapest Chinese steel. Maybe some of it is produced at below cost price. Maybe they're stupid enough to be subsidizing you, right? A gift from the Chinese taxpayer to the US consumer. What happens? What happens is that almost everyone in the US is a little bit better off. Every car maker suddenly gains in productivity without having to lift a finger. More people get employed, prices fall. They then have more to spend. That creates even more jobs. It's a great story for almost everyone, and at the end of the year, I guarantee you, not a single American is going to say, hey, I'm $87 a year better off, I'm going to vote for the guy who signed that deal with China. Because the gains are dispersed and impalpable. Whereas the newly unemployed guy in Pennsylvania or wherever, he knows exactly whom to blame and he votes accordingly. This is why it doesn't happen. This is why there was this concentration on protecting jobs in what happened to be swing states, whatever the cost to the wider economy. The sugar in this country is twice world prices. Twice. Why? Because Florida is a swing state, frankly. And the sugar producers in that state lobby both parties and give a lot of money to both of them. Result: candy makers, confectioners have started moving abroad, either to Canada or to Mexico. Of course they have, because the sugar is so much cheaper there. For every job saved, if we have to use that word, on a sugar plantation in Florida, 16 jobs are lost in food processing in the rest of the country. So why do politicians in both parties keep the quotas and the tariffs in place? Well, dispersed gains, concentrated losses. It's the same basic problem, right? Those 16 people, those 16 jobs that would come back into existence if the prices fell, they don't know who they are. Those jobs exist only in the subjunctive. Whereas the guy on the plantation in Florida, he knows exactly whom to vote for. And this is why it doesn't happen. But you know what, my friends? It's not a good enough reason. And when you've made that change, as New Zealand has done, as Australia is doing now, yeah, there's protest at the time, but within a few years, nobody ever wants to go back because they see the real benefit of free trade, which is that it benefits the poorest people the most. It brings a fall in the cost of living, and the big winners are the people who had to spend the highest percentage of their incomes on buying the commodities. So free trade is the ultimate instrument of poverty alleviation, of conflict resolution, and of social justice. Time for one more? Yep, a couple more. Please.
Mr. Hannan, thank you for coming this evening. Your remarks were deeply inspiring.
Brilliant question, thank you. Time for one more?
And eloquent, and men like you cause us to have renewed faith in our Constitution and in the cause of Western civilization, so I hope you will strongly consider running for Parliament and joining Theresa May's cabinet.
Thank you.
On the subject of the Prime Minister, she was actually opposed to Brexit, I believe. She obviously has taken a different path in following the lead of the country. So my question, she has been often compared to the Iron Lady who first came to power in 1979. So my question is, how do you compare her to Margaret Thatcher, who has a statue at Hillsdale College, and what do you see as the future of the Conservative Party in Great Britain?
Thank you. Well, you're right. Theresa May opposed Brexit, but she behaved as a proper Democrat. And she realized that if you're going to implement the will of the people, that the worst of all worlds is to implement it sulkily or half-heartedly. If you're going to do this thing, you do it properly in such a way as to maximize the advantages to us and to our European allies, and I hope our allies further afield. It's, I suppose, an inevitable comparison. We're not so rich in female conservative prime ministers that people can pick a lot of other examples. I've got to say, by the way, I'm very proud of the fact that both Margaret Thatcher and Theresa May were elected in their own right, rather than in the banana republic fashion of being married to some previous guy, right? I mean, that struck me as But the real difference is this. Margaret Thatcher was elected at a very testing time for us. Your president will remember it. He was in the UK at the time. It was one of our lowest. In fact, I would argue that the 70s were our lowest moment as a nation. We'd run out of money. We had constant strikes. We had rampant trade unions. We even got to the point of having to be bailed out by the IMF. She began, therefore, with very few advantages. And by sheer force of will and a refusal to accept that a great country would retreat forever, she turned things around. Now, Theresa May begins from a much stronger position. Margaret Thatcher never really had her party behind her from the beginning to the end. Theresa May, I think, has a stronger position than any Conservative leader I can think of since Churchill at his height. She inherits a growing economy, and she's on the threshold of being able to reorient our policy away from a declining European trade bloc towards the bits of the world that are growing, which is to say the whole of the world outside Europe, right? And so I think her position is therefore by far the more enviable. Of course, that doesn't necessarily make you a better or a worse regarded leader. No, I think some of the greatest US leaders are overlooked because they happened not to live in especially testing times. Had the circumstances been different, we might think of Grover Cleveland or of Calvin Coolidge as titanic presidents. But in a way, fortunately for them, they were never put to the test in that way. And I think the way things are working out, that we are looking forward to a smooth transition out of the European Union, an amicable, cordial Brexit, leading, I hope, to a renewal of our alliance with the other free English-speaking peoples.
This will be our final question.
Okay.
Hi. I have a question with regards to Brexit, with why the bankers of the EU feel or felt that they could actually fine the UK for pulling out. I don't understand that.
Yeah, I mean, just the question kind of explains why we left, right? I mean, what an extraordinary attitude. I mean, the bankers generally and the bureaucrats loved and love the EU. And they love it, and diplomats and the politicians, they all love it, because they get to Brussels and they perceive a system that was designed by and for people like them. A racket that keeps the general electorate out of the picture and that concentrates power in the hands of officials who are immune to public opinion. So they really take it very bad. Obama-like, they react very badly to being gainsaid. And especially when they are gainsaid by the majority of the people. You know? And so I think it is at the back of their mind that we'll come to our senses if they offer us bad enough terms that we will somehow shake off the spell and meekly come back and apologize, which I think is a bad misreading of our history and a bad misreading of our character. But it's a very revealing policy. Because think about this. If the European Union is saying, we need to deter you from leaving, we need to inflict a punishment beating on anyone who tries to leave, then it's not a club of nations at all, it's a protection racket. And what's going to be the attitude of the ones who are still inside? Are they going to say, oh, well, we're cowed and we'd better stay? Or are they going to say, well, hang on, this isn't what we signed up for. You're now saying that every country would be better off if they left, except insofar as you try and inflict fines and trade barriers on them? Well, we want no part of this. Ultimately, I don't think that's going to happen, though. I have a higher opinion of our European allies than that, although there are definitely people in the European Commission and the European Parliament who want that to happen and who are quite explicit about it. In the 27 national capitals, an altogether more realistic attitude prevails. And I think they are looking forward, as we are, to the moment when we stop being such a bad neighbour, stop being such a bad tenant, and become instead a good neighbour.